Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you again. Week number 2 of our podcast, Life on the Water. I'm Matt, the pastor of Living Water Lutheran Church in Stevensville, Maryland, and my co-host,
Mary, his wife, resident historian.
We're here with week number 2 of our podcast, Life on the Water. And also week number 2 of the coronavirus era, I guess. The coronavirus era, right?
There's a Freudian slip.
Yep.
It's the error and the era. It sounds like you're spouting a conspiracy theory.
Well, you know, some people say it, right? And you just have to Google it.
Let's not feed the beast here.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we're at week number 2 of the coronavirus era, where we are sheltering in place.
The coronavirus era in the United States.
Yes.
Yes, we're like months into the...
We are 2 weeks into having to sit at home
To save humanity.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing faithfully right here.
Netflix. We don't have time for Netflix.
Amazon, all that good stuff. Yeah. It is strange because you would think that with Sunday mornings being canceled, because here in Maryland, our governor has said, don't meet or don't gather anywhere in groups larger than one. And so that obviously includes church. And so we don't have any church on Sunday mornings. And it's strange because we're all us pastors are trying to figure out how do we put something online or do a podcast. And here we are learning all of these new things. I almost feel busier than we were before. I mean, is that true for professors?
It's so true. I was just commenting on this today. I think I have twice as many meetings now. Because before, like we used to say, this will be great because we'll see, everyone will do things by email and we won't have to have all these meetings. But now it seems like because you've eliminated the commute, everyone's like, oh, it'll be just easy to pop onto Zoom or to WebEx and have a quick meeting. And so I have meetings constantly now in a way I didn't actually even 3 weeks ago. So it's it's busier than ever, I guess.
Yeah, but I did see a meme on Facebook that went around.
There was a meme on Facebook?
There's a meme. There's these things called memes.
Yeah.
M-E-M-E.
Yeah.
Memes, I think.
Are you mansplaining to me right now?
I am mansplaining what a meme is.
Yeah.
Right? You'd think they're meme. I don't know what a meme even... Where does it come from? Is it French?
I don't know the origin of the term meme.
It's weird. Anyway, there's memes. I saw a meme the other day on Facebook, and it was about who's the guy who discovered gravity? What was his name?
Isaac Newton?
No, Isaac Newton, real popular guy, right? And didn't he come up with calculus and the theory of gravity?
Yes.
And a couple other things while he was quarantined, or at least isolated, or whatever it is that we're calling it, while he was sheltered in place in
Cambridge, I think.
Cambridge.
Yeah.
Right? And that was like for 2 years to protect themselves from the plague.
He was also unmarried, had no kids, and had people bringing him food and washing his clothes for him.
But I did see the meme, so those are the expectations.
Yeah.
You have to come up with something that redefines our understanding of the entire universe.
So I can't just finish writing my book, which is already an impossible task during this period. But I would have to write a book that transforms humanity.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's
a lot of pressure.
In times of crisis and trauma, this is when all the great minds are able to come up. It's a very relaxing time when the great minds are able to come up with new ways of understanding, these new paradigms by which we can understand the world.
How many of these great minds have toddlers?
I don't know. Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Toddlers do seem to take your attention away from those types of things.
Yes.
And then you're watching a lot of cartoons about dinosaurs.
You got really sucked into Dinosaur Train last night.
Dinosaur Train it's very entertaining.
It's compelling entertainment, isn't it?
It's 12 minutes, so it's right there at my attention span, and it gives it tells you like the Giganotosaurus, or I just call it the Gigantosaurus because it's the big.
Is that not how they pronounce it?
That's not how they pronounce it, but that's how they spell it. I don't know why they don't just call it.
I've been learning a lot about all the dinosaurs I haven't been pronouncing correctly.
Yeah, right, exactly. To me, it's a Gigantosaurus. It's a big saurus.
Yeah.
But Let's take Albert Einstein, for example.
Oh, no.
He came up with the theory of relativity after visiting Taco Bell. And so he had his own crisis and trauma that he experienced, and he was able
Did you also find this on Facebook?
I think I saw it somewhere, so it must be true.
It must be true, yeah.
Yep. So anyway, here we are, week number 2 of our podcast, Life on the Water. And this week we're going to continue our look this spring at some of the stories that Jesus told, some of his more popular stories. And
are we saving the unpopular ones for fall?
That's a good idea. That's really, like the B list.
Unpopular parables.
Something like the B list. I think we just came up with a sermon
with
series. That's how easy it is, people. That's how easy it is. Yeah, the B list, like minor characters, minor stories, things like that. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Done. Fall. Planned. All right. Let's put that in the books. Yes. I like it. Well, we're going to talk about a popular story that Jesus told, which was about a big party. The Great Banquet, right? The story. So we are going to look at that today and see what the good news is for us.
Great.
So we're talking about parties today.
Yeah.
So what was the last party you went to?
So I've been thinking about this, and we don't really live a party life these days.
No, we're rather no, we don't.
No, and
I can't say I ever lived a party life.
Yeah, I really didn't either. We had such nerdy parties in school. I mean, I remember in grad school we had a big, huge party, a rager of history PhD students. And then we had repeat parties every week for a month afterwards to kill the keg. Because that's how long it took to get through all the beer. Because we had a full-size keg. Yeah, so we're not super crazy party people. But I mean, probably weddings?
Weddings? Those would be good.
I mean, we went to a wedding a couple years ago of one of my friends.
Now, I don't consider those real parties.
They're
more like obligations.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, they're obligations. You sort of go to those.
To be fair, we have never been to a wedding where one of the two of us was not in the wedding. Or both of us in our wedding. So, yeah.
No. Have we never gone to a wedding where
we're just spectators?
Went?
No.
Oh, see, that's why. Because, if you go to a wedding and it's your friend, then it's different than if you have to go to a wedding and it's your spouse's friend and then your spouse is in the wedding, like you, right?
Yeah.
I had to go to this wedding. I had to go to a couple weddings.
Yeah.
And you were in them. And so that means I sat there.
And vice versa. Yeah. 6 weddings we've been to together. The only one we got to sit together was ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's wise because, why go to a wedding unless you're in it? Right?
Well, I don't think we were restricting it. Nobody else invited us. They either really love us or they just we'll leave you off the list.
Yeah. So wedding receptions, that's pretty popular. I do remember when we were in seminary, we would have Thirsty Thursdays. And so we would descend from the hill in Gettysburg and go to a place called the Blue Parrot, where they had a pool table there, and so we'd all gather around the pool table and play a bunch of games of pool, and then head back up the hill a couple hours later. So we'd do that. And we also had something called the Luther Bowl, which was a flag football tournament, and that happened every year. And seminaries from around the country would come and we would play this tournament. But at the end of it, we'd all get together, and there was a keg there. Yeah. And
my guess is seminary students who spent all day playing football could actually kill the keg.
I don't think we had a problem. No, no. Which is the dirty little secret, I think, of seminary life.
Hard drinking seminary. Yeah. Well, drinking beer in the tradition of Martin Luther.
Luther,
our German brethren.
Yeah, because I learned when I was participating in a catechism class with one of the larger churches in the Frederick area.
I can't wait to hear how this leads to drinking.
Right, and so we were watching some sort of history on the Reformation on PBS, right? So like a DVD they got from PBS from this guy who does a lot of these historical documentaries. Rick Steves, I think, is his name.
Okay.
And they're kind of entertaining, right? They're easy to
drink every time they said diet of worms.
Martin Luther, this Rick Steves guy said when he went to his college, he was going to be, I guess he was studying theology. Right? He originally was going to be a lawyer, and then he decided he was going to be a monk, and so he was studying theology. But anyway, at college, they would ration beer to them, so they would give them 2 beers a day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they were expected to live on that, huh?
I'm guessing it was the only thing.
That would be more than adequate for us these days.
You got to make sure you got to make sure the stretches. But you got to think, right? What else are they going to drink? The water?
Right.
That's insane.
That's insane. That's true.
So so they would have they'd have 2 beers a day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're at a big party.
Mm-hmm.
So we've established we don't party, but we can imagine.
Yeah, but we've all been to parties, right? Everyone here.
Yeah.
All of our everybody out there in podcast land could probably
right.
think of a party that they've been to. Yeah. And it's the same thing in the ancient world, right? People like to gather around in the courtyards and the fire, the fire pits of the ancient world. And what else were they going to do? They didn't have television.
Sure, yeah.
They didn't have podcasts. They didn't have the radio. They didn't have anything like that. They had to sit around a fire and talk to one another.
And eat and drink.
Yeesh.
Yeah.
yeah, eat and drink. Yeah, eat their slop, right? And drink their watered down wine, right? But so they would sit around and tell stories to one another. So they, it was almost like you had a party every night. No, probably not the way we think of college parties, but as far as like the backyard, fire up the grill, hey buddy, can I get you a high life, things like that. That type of party. And Jesus was part of these parties as he was an itinerant preacher, right? He would go around the different towns in Israel, and he
Plus free beer.
Yeah, he probably enjoyed a lot of. Did they have beer back then for them?
No
I don't think they did. I know the Egyptians did, right? I've heard that, right?
But I'm again not.
Mm-hmm. So anyway,
can't speak to that.
Maybe that's what he did. He liked free food, and so he would go from town to town, to fire pit to fire pit, and he would try and get as much free food as he could. And while he was there, he'd also help set up a community that was tried to live out the virtues and the ethics of God's kingdom here on earth, right? So people could experience God's presence in our midst, right? Which is the good news. So he would gather around with people at the fire, and he would tell stories, right? These parables. And so one of the stories was about a party, about a guy who decides to throw a party once. And so he invites a bunch of people, and these people say, hey, we'll come. That's no problem. I'll mark it on my calendar. So they get out their ancient iPhones. Right?
Sure, yeah.
Which these days we just get out our iPhone and we can get the little keyboard and we tap on it. Well, they had to
and then forget to check the calendar and
right. Their iPhones were just clay tablets, and so in one pocket they'd have their clay tablet. Their iClay. And the other one they'd have the chisel and the hammer. And so, hey, what date is that party? It's going to be April 5th. Okay.
Yeah, but if it's chiseled in stone, you'd think they'd remember.
Oddly enough, they don't. No, very soft stone. So sometimes it rubs off, which is exactly what happened to these people. They forgot to go, and so the time for the party comes, and the host notices that 15 minutes go by, nobody shows up. 30 minutes go by, nobody shows up. 45 minutes go by, nobody shows up. After an hour, he's like, no one's coming. I've been stood up.
He's feeling very stressed out.
Very stressed out.
Yeah.
Very embarrassed. 100% of the people who were invited didn't show.
Right.
So he sends more servants out and asks them, hey, go find the people that we invited. Remind them that there's this party. Maybe they forgot. Maybe their iClays sort of lost, they dropped them. Maybe they shattered on the ground.
Sure,
I don't know.
yeah.
Whatever. Maybe they had to melt them down to make a cup. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so these servants, they would find these folks, and they all had an excuse. Like, And they sounded like pretty good excuses, like, hey, I just bought a car and I got to test drive it, right? Or this great car. And
yes,
so
that sounds like an authentic ancient world excuse. Thank you.
As we've seen on a documentary, The Flintstones.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
They did have cars back then.
Right. Because where else would your dinosaur ride? Got it. I'm
dinosaur,
sorry. I apologize.
And they didn't
I
have,
take it back.
and the gas pedal was your feet.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's a documentary.
I understand that. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying and setting me straight.
Yeah. So one guy had one guy. That's how you mansplain everybody. Yeah. One guy had he bought a field and he said, I got to go check it out, make sure it's a good field. Mm-hmm. And the other guy said, hey, I just got married, so I can't show. All of these seem like perfectly good excuses. He said they can't come. So the servants go back and tell this fella, the host of the party, that none of his guests are going to be arriving. Mm-hmm. And the guy's distraught. He's like, oh man, I can't.
He put out all the money, he got all the preparation.
Yeah. This is embarrassing. I got to have somebody here, I got to save some face. And so he goes out to the middle of the street and he invites anyone who's passing by, right? Perfect strangers, people he knows, whoever. And he fills up his banquet hall with all these people, and he just has a party anyway, right? And everybody has a good time. They have a great meal. They clean out the open bar, and then everyone goes home.
All right, so what do we take from that story, other than, honor your invitations and empathy for the man whose guests didn't show up?
Yeah, well, that's what we're going to talk about next. So the one thing that comes to mind for me when I read this story and try and figure out what does it mean for us today, I think of the client-patron relationships that we learned about in seminary when we tried to figure out what was it like to live in the ancient world.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'd have patrons and you have clients, right? And it was a very hierarchical structure, right? Mm-hmm. So
you missed it. He was gesturing beautifully and demonstrating with his hands. But
I guess
as one does on a podcast.
I guess people can't really hear that, can they?
No.
No. So anyway, just imagine me making some sort of hand gesture that would mean hierarchical structure to the economy back then.
Yeah.
So Caesar would have been a patron, right? And everybody under him would have been his clients.
Okay.
And so...
And that's like down to peasants.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So
so then everything that... I guess it maybe... What do we compare it to? Like a... like some sort of pyramid scheme, right?
Oh, like Amway.
Well, I have no idea how Amway works.
Yeah.
How does Amway work?
Well, I mean, or like the idea where there's somebody up. This is probably a terrible analogy. Sorry, I'm not sure this works. Now that I'm thinking about it, because there's a pyramid, and everybody at the bottom, like everything they do, a little piece of what they earn goes to the next level above them. And then the next level above them gets whatever they earn plus a little piece of the people below them. But a piece of that goes to the person above them and the person above them. So the people at the top get a little piece from everybody all the way down. And then, based on which level you are, determines how much money you make. Yeah.
I think that's a good way of understanding it for our modern times. Right?
Really?
That there's this pyramid and money flows up. Right?
Yeah, so the people at the bottom never actually make much money.
So like Caesar owns everything.
Right.
You don't actually own your land. Caesar owns your land, right? And then you give a portion of the wealth that land grows. Right? So imagine you got that triangle of at the very top, and then below that you have like the other 80% who can barely survive.
Right.
Who get taxed so heavily they have to take loans out in order to afford the very taxes, and then eventually they become so indebted that they just have to sell their land to the people who are in the triangle at the top.
Okay.
Right. So eventually, the guy at the top of the triangle owns everything.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's the patron, and everyone below him is the client. And so in this big triangle that you have at the top, there's a lot of little triangles as well. Mm-hmm. So a town around Galilee where Jesus lived and traveled, Tiberias, would have had its own version of that triangle where you had a guy at the top and he had all the people below him, right? Mm-hmm. And then in people's zip codes, you'd have other triangles as well. And on the block where you lived, you'd have other triangles. You always had somebody who was at the top and they had people below them.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So you had patrons and you had clients. And the purpose of this was to make sure that the wealth kept going up and up and up and up.
Yeah.
And to the big man on
didn't linger
campus.
down with the masses. Yep. Okay.
So
maybe Amway does work. Okay.
Maybe it does. Well, as long as you're at the top, right. I think
Amway
is a very good deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just that is what we have to. That's what comes to mind when I hear this story. The purpose of parties back then weren't so much what we might think of today of
just to socialize, let off some steam, get together.
Or a mere fantasy in the coronavirus era.
That's right.
Of the day when we're
Something
allowed
that exists
to leave
only
our houses.
in our minds.
Yes. Yeah. Or as a distant memory. Yep. Yeah. Or as a fantasy or a dream that one day hopefully will come true again when the governor lets us leave our houses. But here, the parties that Jesus is talking about here is one where a patron wants to throw a party for his clients, right?
Yeah.
And so when he's inviting people, he's inviting his clients, right? So this guy is not going to invite people above him because they're not going to show up.
Right.
So,
but with his clients, he feels they have a sense of obligation, so they'll have to go.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Obligation. Like they're like, well, if I'm going to go to this party because it makes me look good that I'm invited, right? And then I can get in this guy's good graces and maybe become his client, or his employer or employee of some sort. And
work my way up the pyramid, maybe get some people under me. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
It helps me become more influential in order to get a better position in society.
Okay.
Right?
That makes a lot of sense, but then it also means why don't they show up? It's crazy that they would not show up to a party.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Why didn't they show up? And they all had their excuses. But the guy who's throwing the party, the patron, he's not doing this because he's being kind-hearted. He's doing this
benevolent and magnanimous, and we're going to just have some time to break bread and enjoy each other's company.
Yep. So he's inviting people, and he knows he's obligating them to show up. Because if he throws a really good party, it shows how generous he is, right? Shows how...
So it also helps him move up.
Yes, it shows him how influential he is, right? And so the more people that show up, the bigger party he has, the more influential he looks to the guy above him who happens to hear about this when he's throwing his party. Right. So he gets a chance to get invited to his patron's party, right? So this is a big deal. So when people don't show up...
It's a big deal for the guy throwing the party. Because it really makes him look bad, and it means that the party doesn't do all the things he wanted it to do.
Right. He gets embarrassed.
Yeah.
And then the guy higher up on the pyramid that's across town...
He's like, ugh, he's a nobody. Yeah. Nobody even goes to his parties.
Exactly. This guy threw a party and nobody showed up. So he's not worth my time.
Right.
I'm going to invite somebody else, right? So when he's drawing up his guest list, that guy gets the big strike right through his name.
Right. Okay.
So it's important that people show up. And so when they don't show up, he's terribly embarrassed. So you wouldn't know this, but we just had to take like a 4-hour break. So, we sort of ended the last section there with the host going out to the street, but we had to stop for dinner and spend time with our daughter, put her to bed,
We had a pretty terrific concert from Adriana.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Singing into her toy microphone.
Yep. She has a little keyboard and she's learning how to sing into it and was singing along to. Is it Für Elise? Is that how you pronounce it from Beethoven?
Oh, yeah.
Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding.
Except for her, all the lyrics are E-I-E-I-O.
E-I-E-I-E-I-O. E-I-O, E-I-O. So that was awesome.
So she's a musical genius, is all we're saying.
Yep.
Yeah.
She's on, well, yeah. Well, she's on par with Beethoven and Bach. That's all we're saying. Yeah. Or probably far beyond them. But, judge whether or not you think that makes her a genius. So anyway, we're with this. So we left the host.
Yeah.
The last time, which was for us many, many hours ago. So we're trying to remember what we were talking about.
Like seconds, minutes.
Yes, for you it wasn't very long. But I think where did we leave him? He was
going out into the streets to gather people so that he wouldn't lose face.
Yes, so
by
he
having
was
no one at his party.
Yes, so he invited a bunch of people. Nobody showed up. He went out to get them. Mm-hmm. They told him, we're busy, with some pretty transparent excuses about how they really just didn't want to come.
Yeah.
So now he's embarrassed. He's going to fill up his banquet hall, come hell or high water. So he goes out into the street and he starts inviting everyone and anyone that he sees because he's going to fill that banquet. He's going to save face. So what we have is a host who has been humiliated, embarrassed, and he's desperate, right? He desperately wants to fill this hall so he can still look good, right? If he's not going to fill it with a bunch of his clients for economic purposes, he can at least fill it with
people,
people off the street who are probably not too well off,
right?
And so he's going to look like a pretty good guy. So hopefully he's thinking,
now he's super generous.
Yes, now he's super generous. So he's going to try and do the best he can and
under
have
the
that
circumstances.
party.
Yeah.
So my question is, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What's the moral of the story for us today?
Right.
That's a question.
Oh, that was a question.
Yes.
I was just like planning on nodding along while you explained it to me. It seems like Jesus is making a point about who we invite to the party, and that we shouldn't just be focusing on our clients who may or may not appreciate our outreach, but we should be focusing on everyone, even people we might otherwise overlook.
It's a very good take.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in this sense, the party is the party the kingdom of God, or is the party the church?
See now, right there, you're allegorizing.
I am.
Yes, you are trying to find.
It's been a long day. I can't help it.
You're trying, which is something, look, we do that, right? I mean, it's been 2,000 years. How are we supposed to figure out what these
you try and put it in modern terms, and
I mean, look, they come from the scripture, they come from the Bible. So we look at these stories as absolute. We kind of forget that they were told in a context to real people 2,000 years ago who were facing real problems and wanted to hear real concrete hope.
So when Jesus moved on to the next town, they probably spent months debating, like, who do you think the party was? What do you think it was?
They spent thousands of years.
Yeah. Oh, fair enough.
And ticking, still trying to figure out
exactly what he meant. Yeah.
Well, he mentioned a blade of grass. That is, and then you try and figure out what everything means.
And it's green and it's pointy. Yeah. So too is, okay.
But I like to look at parables as their stories.
Yeah.
And they meant something to the person telling them. They meant something to the people hearing them. And they were concrete. They gave concrete hope to folks.
Right.
So
what hope does this story give you and give to his listeners?
When I read it, I think of a desperate person who is going to do anything to get people to sit around his table, inviting anyone.
Yeah.
Let's think of how much trouble many churches have with filling their pews on any given Sunday morning. Now, of course, right now, during the coronavirus era,
nobody's filling any pews.
We're having very much trouble filling our pews. In fact, my attendance the past couple weeks has been 0. I didn't even show up.
Right.
Right? So we have a bishop here in our synod. That's what Lutherans call certain regions of collections of churches, who goes around churches, and he'll take some pictures and put them up on Facebook, and there's not very many people left
at a lot of the churches.
In a lot of the churches that
not all, but
right.
Yeah.
Some of them are packed.
Yeah.
Some of the bigger ones have folks, but there's a lot of churches. Yeah.
Some of the bigger churches have more people. Tell me more,
Yeah,
Matt. That was a really insightful observation.
Some of the churches with more people have more people there.
Interesting. Interesting.
It's amazing.
Yes. That's a observation of the year.
But you look at these pictures, right? And you see, but it bears witness to a problem in most churches. In fact, all churches really, that attendance is sort of dropping off. There's not as many people going to church today as there were last generation.
It's nowhere near as socially expected as it was in, say, the 40s and 50s.
Yeah. So, whatever the reasons for that, I don't know. How do you fix that? I don't know. All I just know is this. In light of this story, it makes me think of churches that are half empty, right? Or nearly completely empty. And that means, the Great Banquet Hall is wide open. Mm-hmm. The people aren't coming.
Yeah, so go out in the street and bring them in.
Yes, so what do you do? What would a desperate God want you to do? Mm-hmm. Go out to the streets and invite them in. Invite anybody and everybody.
Right.
Everybody has an invitation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the good news.
It is
Everybody has the invitation.
It's good news because it's something we can do now, even when we're shut down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's virtual invitations, out to the virtual street, but
through Zoom, Google something, Facebook
Google
something,
Hangouts, I think.
Google Hangout, Facebook, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever your favorite social media is, we can connect with people, but especially when we get back into the swing of things and emerge from our homes again, get out in the streets and invite folks. Mm-hmm. That's what God wants us to do. And I think that's the part, or the character about God that this story reveals. A desperate God saying, and everyone, come in.
All are welcome.
Everybody's a welcome. Yeah. You have an invitation. There are no restrictions.
Mm-hmm. It is good news.
That is good news. All right, podcast number 2 in the books. Isn't this exciting? Yeah. One of these days we'll get used to this and it won't take us the entire day to put one of these together.
Right. Yeah.
That'd be great. We just crank these out.
Yeah, I feel like you can tell we're novices when we lost 10 minutes giggling into the microphone?
At the beginning. I don't know if that made the final cut or not, but yes. Yes, our first takes was...
it's fair to cut that
was
out.
A lot of laughter trying to get used to this. Yep. So this is week number 2, and we looked at the Great Banquet, and then next week we will have the story of the very special pancake when we will have a virtual pancake breakfast together as a community, whether that's the Living Water community or everybody else
wants to join us.
Yeah, anybody,
off the streets.
Anybody off the streets and from podcast land, you are all invited. So next Sunday, sit down with the podcast. What do you bake or cook? Is it a batch of pancakes? Mm-hmm. A bunch of pancakes?
Fry pancakes?
Fry up some pancakes. Yeah. Make sure you set one aside as the special pancake, and we will eat that together, remembering the promises God has for us, who we are to God, who we are to each other, even in this time of social distancing. And remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We're on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and facsimiles thereof. So, yep. So go ahead and get it.
The others, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So until next week when we eat that special pancake, I'm Matt.
I'm Mary.
And this was Life on the Water.
Bye.